Ben Westhoff, Fentanyl Incorporated, How Rogue Chemists Are Creating the Deadliest Wave of the Opioid Epidemic. Fentanyl Incorporated is a striking exploration of the deadly synthetic opioid epidemic sweeping through the United States and beyond. Ben Westhoff delves into the factors that led to this crisis, from pharmaceutical companies to Chinese chemists and Mexican cartels. He chronicles the 4-year journey that puts him face to face with all sides of the epidemic. Through an understanding of the origins of fentanyl and the scientists who create these dangerous substances, Westhoff aims to offer clarity on the potential consequences of continuing the war on drugs and highlights the urgent need for harm reduction practices.
Fentanyl Epidemic Unveiled. Ben Westhoff's book uncovers the pathology leading to the global opioid crisis. 4 years of investigative research reveals a dark connection between drug makers in China and cartels in Mexico fueling the West's demand for synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Westhoff's bold claim is that America's war on drugs cannot succeed, and that the harm reduction approach of Canada and Europe must be adopted instead. With a clear and realistic picture of addiction in contemporary American life, it's no wonder why the National Book Review praised this extensively reported and vividly written book as mandatory reading. America's Deadliest Addiction. Fentanyl, a synthetic drug many times more potent than heroin, is the driving force behind America's worst-ever drug epidemic. Users often overdose and die due to its high potency. Pharmaceutical companies, including Purdue, must take responsibility for the crisis, as many addicts switched to powerful synthetics when prescription drug deaths leveled off. Westhoff's book highlights the severity of the epidemic and shines a light on the dangers of black market opioids. The death toll surpasses that of crack, methamphetamine, car accidents, and shootings, making fentanyl America's deadliest addiction. The dangerous world of synthetic drugs. The creation of synthetic drugs often begins with the intention of producing beneficial medicines, but people find a way to use them for illicit purposes. Author Westhoff notes that MDMA has few side effects and could potentially treat PTSD and other psychological disorders. However, the DEA banned it in 1985. Fentanyl and its analogues, discovered by chemist Paul Janssen in 1959, have fueled drug addictions and overdose deaths, with the drugs frequently mixed into other substances. Westhoff warns that not only are the drugs themselves dangerous, but the unknown proper dosages make them all the more lethal. Mexican cartels, Chinese manufacturers, and the U.S. opioid crisis. The opioid crisis in the U.S. is fueled by drug dealers getting their supply of fentanyl-laced heroin and meth from Mexico, with Chinese manufacturers providing the precursors. The DEA and U.S. Customs are struggling to stop the influx of synthetic drugs coming through foreign packages, with only a small fraction being inspected. The majority of the drugs come through official border crossings or tunnels, and border walls make no difference. Mexican cartel members move the drugs using small-time dealers and blending in with the community. The inconsistency in cutting fentanyl into heroin means that neither dealers nor users know its potency. Chinese manufacturer Yuanqing sells precursors to buyers in Mexico and the U.S., with subsidies from the Chinese government. India also supplies to the opioid trade in Africa and the Middle East, but lags behind China in production. The author warns of the potential for India to ramp up production and exacerbate the opioid crisis. Failed war on drugs. Despite the United States government spending billions of dollars and providing local enforcement with unparalleled resources, the war on drugs has failed to achieve its objective of eliminating drugs from society. In his book, Westhoff discusses the inception of the war on drugs by President Richard Nixon in 1971 and explains how Ronald Reagan implemented severe penalties, and Bill Clinton added the three-strike rule, resulting in life sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. In addition, the author highlights the consequences of the war on drugs, including drug-related murders in Mexico and the annual $58 billion spent on drug enforcement measures that have proven to be ineffective in slowing the flow of drugs. Innovative drug reduction strategies. In Fentanyl Incorporated, author Ben Westhoff showcases successful alternative drug reduction strategies in Europe. Rather than solely focusing on law enforcement, authorities find success in working with nonprofits and agencies to educate drug users and test the purity of drugs. This approach has resulted in a 90% lower rate of overdose deaths than in the U.S. Westhoff highlights Energy Control, a government-funded drug testing operation, as the best harm reduction program worldwide. Spain's elimination of restrictions on ecstasy and other traditional drugs has also all but eradicated overdose deaths. Raw reporting on America's drug crisis. Westhoff's vivid and hard-hitting prose captures the immense horror of drug addiction in America. His reporting style, which blends street vernacular with in-depth research, makes the book a compelling page-turner. Though difficult to digest, it highlights personal, corporate, and governmental greed, preying on helpless addicts and the lack of good news in the opioid epidemic. While exploring harm reduction, Ben Westhoff paints a raw and intimate portrait that's not for the faint-hearted. Other essential reads on this topic include Dope Sick by Beth Macy and Dreamland by Sam Quinones.
As the opioid epidemic ravages through nations across the globe, Fentanyl Incorporated captures its grim reality by investigating the role of rogue chemists, drug makers in China, cartels in Mexico, and pharmaceutical companies in the United States. The dark and harrowing accounts underline the futility of the war on drugs, as drug-related deaths continue to soar despite billions of dollars in resources poured into enforcement. Westhoff argues that the United States must move from prohibition to adopting harm reduction approaches prevalent in Europe and Canada that focus on education, user safety, and drug purity testing. This vital shift has the potential to save countless lives and effectively address this devastating crisis.